Good afternoon, friends. It's a real pleasure to have with us Anil Swarup, the former Secretary to Government of India, but more important, he's a very distinguished author. He's just come out with a very interesting book called Encounters with Politicians. Today's Value of Words encounter with Anil Swarup takes place as he's in the sunny lands of Sri Lanka, traveling around, but we've caught him. We've caught him to have a conversation on why did you write this book and why do you call it an encounter?
Uh, I called it an encounter because the nature of engagements with the politicians. In strict terms, it was not unpleasant in most of the cases, but nonetheless, it was an encounter because that's how we as civil servant have looked at politicians, especially I did during the initial years of my career. I thought all politicians were villains and how wrong I was. Through my career, I discovered that. And that is why I use the word encounter, because in the beginning, I thought every engagement with the political servant, that actually speaking, they weren't encounters, so to say. They were very, very pleasant encounters in many cases, but nonetheless, an interaction with them with a lot of challenges to begin with, a lot of challenge thereafter as well. But one could thereafter, as one learned to manage them, the encounters ceased to be unpleasant ones as they were in the beginning.
Very well said, sir. And I think, one of the things which comes out in your book, when you talk about 93 politicians, and you've, made a typology of people who are district type politicians, people who have reached the apex level in the state government, people who are union ministers. Do you find a little pattern? Do you find a little pattern between or a sort of a typology that you can say that district politicians are like this, state politicians are like this, and union ministers are like this? Is it possible to make such a classification?
Frankly speaking, I found every politician very different. Very difficult to work out a scheme that went through all the politicians, a thread that ran through all the politicians. I couldn't find one. But if you ask me, there was some difference between politicians that I met at the district level and the state level and the central level. I found that at the central level, the politicians were much more mature. Maybe they have come through the grill and, they have matured themselves. They don't go into such issues as a politician in the district would. So they were more concerned about policies on larger issues, whereas politicians at the local level, at the district level, there were very, very petty issues that were raised. Obviously, they were concerned for such issues at the local level. Nothing against it, but that's how it was. The politicians at the state level, I come from the state of UP, where I worked for 17 years. Their concern was more transfer and posting than policies, whereas the ministers at the center obviously there weren't many transfers in any case at the central level, but their concern was more related to policies as compared to the politicians in the state, who were more concerned about transfers and postings. So in that sense, one could discern some difference between the politicians at the center and the state and the district level. But broadly speaking, if I were to answer a question with regard to politicians, I would say that each politician was very different from the other.
I get the point. So I think one of the points that you just made was that because the tenure at the center is far more stable. For example, a joint secretary is normally a joint secretary, barring unforeseen circumstances. So likewise, would you suggest that if there was a fixed tenure for a DM, say 3 years, or 4 years, do you think that will make the encounters more manageable and everyone would know what is it to expect and what is it not to expect? Do you think that will...
I'm not very sure. I think at the district level, the politician would be what he is, irrespective of the tenure. Tenure would help improvement in delivery of what the officer does. It also would help fixing the responsibility of those that don't work properly. But as far as the politician is concerned, the nature of the politician would remain the same at the center or the state as they are. Because the issues that they confront are very different from the issues that politicians confront at the central level. Perhaps even those politicians who work at the center, when they would be working at the district level, would have the same temperament, attitude. But when they work at the central level, the issues that they raise are very different from issues raised at the district level. So whereas improvement or the increase in the tenure or security of tenure at the district level will improve the functioning of the bureaucrat, but as far as the politicians are concerned, I don't think there would be any change.
Oh, thank you. In fact, let me just inform all our listeners that this program comes to you through the National Digital Library of India, which is based out of IIT Kharagpur, and the Value of Words, with the support from Garhwal Post, Green Panel, Coal India, ONGC, Incredible India, Cello, REC, NEFED, and of course the Uttarakhand government. And if you have any questions, do let us know on the YouTube what your questions are, or you can send a WhatsApp to the Value of Word, so that we'll request Mr. Swarup to answer those questions. Now, Mr. Swarup, you've dealt with 93 politicians in your book, and clearly the favorite and the most outstanding ones among them, in your opinion, is Kalyan Singh. Tell us more about Mr. Kalyan Singh, because somehow or the other, Mr. Kalyan Singh has not made it to the national headlines. He's not yet got his Bharat Ratna. He's not yet got his Padma Vibhushan. So maybe let's hear more about him, your encounters with him, your engagement with him.
I found him a very different politician. In fact, sometimes in the beginning, in the first 2 years that I worked with him as his Director Information and Public Relations, I could barely believe that he's a politician, because I had come from a district where I'd seen all sorts of politicians. When I saw and spoke to Kalyan Singh, it was totally, totally different, right from the beginning. First of all, my selection to the post of Director Information, usually a politician would meet the officer before he picks him up as his Director Information and Public Relations. He never met me, or I never met him. I was posted as Director Information and Public Relations, a very critical post, and then I went to call on him. There were many instances through which I discovered him, as it were. To begin with, was an instance right in the beginning of my career, or my stint as Director Information, was within, I think, 20 days of my joining. My routine was to go to his residence every morning and brief him about the press coverage. In those days, we didn't have the social media. It was primarily the newspaper coverage that I used to discuss with him, and how to respond to some of the news items. On that particular day, when I reached his residence, it was, I think, around 9 o'clock. He appeared a bit agitated, with the Chief Secretary and the DGP in attendance. And the agitation was primarily on account of his meetings that had been lined up for the Etawah by-election. He had 7 meetings lined up, and he was a bit unwell. So he was talking to his personal staff and telling them to cancel the last 2 meetings because he wasn't well. And both the DGP and the Chief Secretary agreed with the Chief Minister that he wouldn't be in a position to attend all the 7 meetings. I was standing there quietly, but I couldn't hold myself. I intervened and said, "Sir, though it is a political matter, a few days ago I was district magistrate, and whenever Chief Minister came to a district, there was a lot of excitement, there was a lot of expectation. So my suggestion was that you should go to the meeting. You should not cancel it just a day in advance. You should go there, and you may not speak, but you should visit that place." He appeared a bit upset. He looked at me, and then he said, "How do you expect me to go there when I'm not unwell? When I'm unwell?" As he said that, the Chief Secretary started nudging me, asking me to keep quiet, but I didn't. I told Mr. Kalyan Singh, "Sir, my job was to give you my advice. You can take a decision. You can attend those meetings." When I made the second statement, the nudging was even stronger. Thereafter, there was a pin drop silence for about 15 seconds. When Kalyan Singh ji turned towards me and said, "Anil ji, you are right." And the moment he said, "You are right," the Chief Secretary suddenly stopped nudging me, and he agreed with the Chief Minister and said, "Sir, Anil is right." This is something which Kalyan Singh remembered for a long, long time. When he became Chief Minister for the second time, I didn't go to call on him. That was not my wont. I never called on politicians. So after 3 days of taking oath, he rang me up. He said, "Anil, you haven't come to meet me. Anil ji, आप मुझसे मिलने नहीं आए." मैंने कहा, "सर, आप अभी मुख्यमंत्री बने हैं. आप व्यस्त होंगे. जब आप खाली होंगे तो मैं आ जाऊंगा." He asked me to come forthwith. So I went to meet him. When I entered his room, he said, "I want to make you my secretary," by which time I had got promoted. So I said, "Fine, sir." He said, "You won't ask me why do I want to make you secretary?" I said, "You must have thought over it." He said, "No, you sit down, I'll tell you." And when I sat down, he narrated that very incident which I narrated just now. He said, "That is why I want you to become." So this was one of the many such examples where a chief minister was willing to accept criticism, differences of opinion. In fact, he mentioned to me that in the beginning, I used to feel that this gentleman is very blunt. He speaks his mind. And later on, he started appreciating that point of view. And there were many occasions where I spoke my mind out to him. And despite initial disagreements, he went on to agree with me. Of course, there were instances where he didn't. But he encouraged people to speak their mind out, which is very unusual of politicians that I've seen thereafter.
No, I would say the same thing for Mr. N.D. Tiwari as well. I mean, having worked with Mr. N.D. Tiwari in Uttarakhand, I would say the same thing. I mean, he was, and you mentioned about N.D. Tiwari also in your book. So I think if politicians and bureaucrats could talk, if we could converse, things would be much easier and much better. In fact, Mantrana Shakti, which is so important in the management of government. So it's our job. I mean, we may not be called mantris or ministers, but part of the job as bureaucrats is to provide the right information at the right time and in a non-adversarial manner. So you also were mentioning about, how Mr. Kalyan Singh had a meeting with Mr. Vajpayee and how you helped him draft some of the key points. You were exceeding your brief as a bureaucrat, in the very conventional sense, because you were not really working in his office. You were working for the government of India, and you were giving, advice to a state chief minister. Is that not exceeding your brief? Let's put it like this. Is it not
Eh,
exceeding your brief?
In retrospect, I totally agree with you. I was indeed exceeding my brief. But that's how life is, you sometimes do exceed your brief. In this instance, as I reflect on those moments, I did exceed my brief. But the situation was such that I was asked by the chief minister to pen down a few lines, pen down few sheets. The options that I had was tell him that I am no more working with you, so it's not my job to tell you that. And the matter would have been over. I could have said that. But since the manner in which he asked me, it appeared that he was dependent on me for those critical notes that I used to make for him. And then I couldn't say no. I must confess that probably, strictly speaking, I should have said no, shouldn't have done it, but I did that. I did that for a person who I admired as an individual. I admired as an administrator. I admired as a politician. Sometimes when you admire people so much, you go beyond your brief. I did go beyond my brief.
So, in other words, it is not really possible to delink the personal from the professional.
Not always. One should. One should. Ideally speaking, as a professional, I had no business to indulge with him after I had joined the central government. I had no business. But after all, you are a human being and you have your frailties. And probably that was an occasion when I got to know another side of Kalyan Singh. Of course, that was something which happened after he had met Mr. Vajpayee. But strictly speaking, and ethically speaking, I don't think it was right for me to give him advice, even if he asked me for that advice when I was not there.
You had written lovely, you'd written a lovely verse on Kalyan Singh ji. So you'd like our listeners to hear that from you. I think we have lost a little bit of touch with Mr. Swarup. Let me tell
Sorry,
you
I
that
think
he is.
I lost.
Yes.
Okay. So the situation was, as you were mentioning.
Yeah. I want you to
Sorry.
recite the poem. I want you to recite the poem.
Okay, I will do that. The lines were, समय रुका नहीं, हम क्यों ठहर गए. समय रुका नहीं, हम क्यों ठहर गए. अभी तो हम चले भी नहीं, फिर क्यों थक गए. उठो पथिक मत भ्रमित हो. धूमिल अंधियारे में श्रेष्ठ वही जो घिरा नहीं हो क्षणिक निराशा में. जागो जगाओ मन मत बहलाओ. एक मसीहा तुम भी बन जाओ.
How wonderful. How wonderful. That this is about time. This is about, moving ahead with the right spirit and everything. A lot of civil servant aspirants are also very keen. They're keen to join us. They're probably watching this program. What sort of message would you like to convey to those who are joining the civil service today? How should they look at the political class? I mean, straight from the panchayat level to the zilla panchayat level to the topmost levels, because in one of I mean in one interaction with some civil servants from Europe, I was telling them that, look, we are the only civil service in the world which deals with the political executive at all levels. I mean, we deal with the political executive at the zilla panchayat level, at the state level, at the federal level. So how would you I mean, is there a specific message that you would like to convey?
It all came gradually to me, and that's what I'll share with the aspirants to civil service and younger civil servants. To begin with, as I said earlier, I treated them as villains. But gradually I discovered they have their own compulsions. They have a very important role to play in democracy. They're articulating the views, opinions of the people they come in touch with, and they are great communicators of the needs of the people in the ground. This is something which came to me gradually. Obviously, when they do that, they have their own personal interest as well. So then I evolved, I understood them, and then I said, okay, I will try and do whatever they tell me so long as it is not illegal. If it is illegal, I will say a straight no. There's no question of doing anything illegal. There is a huge gray area, and then there is something which is absolutely legitimate, should be done. Anything which should be done was done promptly and should be done promptly. Then there is a gray area where it is not illegal, but as per your point of view, you feel that it is not correct. Your own personal value system, or maybe the values that you have acquired over a period of time. The job of a civil servant is to try and convince the politician into believing in what he thinks is right. And if you have good communication skills, my experience tells me that you will be able to convince him most of the time. But there will be occasions where he will overrule you, he will disagree with you. At that point in time, the bureaucrat should go ahead and implement what is asked of him to do. I'd like to repeat here, it should not be an illegal demand. It should not be contrary to any rule, regulation, law, or constitution. If that be the case, then the officer has to say no. And hence, a civil servant had to understand the difference between compromise and accommodation. When it comes to compromising law, rule, regulation, absolute no. But the bureaucrat should not think that he is the only right person around and all politicians are rascals, ruffians. It is absolutely wrong. They should not only listen to him, but after they are overruled by the politician, go ahead and implement what is asked of them to the letter of law.
Wonderful. Another question which I have for you is, you see, as the union
Sanjeev, can you be slightly louder? Slightly
yes,
louder.
I said, as the union coal secretary and union education secretary, you had the opportunity to interact with several state governments and several chief ministers, and you've made a mention of these chief ministers. Now, is there a pattern between Hindi-speaking states and the southern states, Hindi-speaking states and the western states? Because that's a common thing which people say, that the cow belt thinks one way, the south thinks another way. So, in your experience, do you find some basic differences in the patterns of governance in the cow belt, if one was to use that term, or the Hindi-speaking states and the south?
As far as the politicians were concerned, I am not very sure there was much of a difference between north and the south. But as far as the bureaucracy was concerned, as far as the ethos was concerned, as far as systems were concerned, I could see a pattern. I could see that in the south, they were much more receptive. They were much more open. I'm talking of the bureaucracy. I'm talking of the ethos in that place. Politicians, it mattered from chief minister to chief minister. So let me give you a very specific example. So for example, Mr. Naveen Patnaik in Odisha, extremely receptive. I don't know what happened before that, but as an individual, he was receptive and he made his government very receptive. Let me come to UP now. In UP, there were different chief ministers and hence the reception was different. There was no UP ethos per se as far as politician was concerned. Let's go to Telangana or Andhra Pradesh as it was earlier. When Mr. Chandrababu Naidu was there, I've written about him, an extremely positive, receptive person. Then you go to further south to Tamil Nadu. So long as Madam Lady was there as the Chief Minister, Jayalalitha, one hardly got an occasion to meet her. But come other Chief Minister, you totally accessible, you meet them. So it depended on the leader as far as the politician was concerned, how that leader was. But the bureaucratic ethos of North and South was very different. The reception, the response, I mean, South in general was much more responsive, much more receptive. I say that of South in general. Of North, since I came from UP cadre, obviously I had that advantage. The response was much better. But you go to other states of the North, the response was not as good. So at the bureaucratic level, I think there is a difference between North and South. But at the political level, it mattered who the Chief Minister was.
You've had some experience of working in Jharkhand post-retirement, and the CM had asked you to come and work with him. So tell us about that encounter and why that encounter did not last for long, because you decided to step back.
I had gone to Jharkhand at the request of the Chief Minister because I used to go there as Coal Secretary, then Education Secretary, and Mr. Akbar Das was the Chief Minister. So when I was about to retire, he rang me up. He said, post-retirement, can you guide us? Can you advise us on a few issues? I somehow felt that here was a Chief Minister who's trying to do something for the state. I genuinely felt that. I saw some reflection of Kalyan Singh in him. So I said yes. I would have usually not said no because I decided not to take up any government assignment, but I did. And then I went to Jharkhand and I saw in him a person who was prepared to listen, prepared to change his views. I can tell you about the non-governmental organizations. He was totally against non-governmental organization, but I managed to convince him. We had a conference there with all NGOs came. So in that sense, he was truly remarkable. But I was having a problem because I had to do work in different context in Delhi and elsewhere in the country. And I was finding difficult to do both the jobs in Jharkhand and pursuing my other activities in Delhi and elsewhere. So finally, I decided that I won't be able to do both the things. I had to take a call, either give up my other activities and focus totally on Jharkhand or leave Jharkhand and come to Delhi. I decided to come to Delhi and work here. That's how it ended.
Well, you see, I must tell all the viewers and listeners here that one of the things that has probably kept him busy is Nexus of the Good or Nexus for the Good. So tell us something more about Nexus of the Good, and how did you think about it and what is it doing now?
Nexus of Good.
Nexus of Good, Nexus of Good, right. So I just added the proposition to it, but over to you, sir.
During the course of my career, I discerned that there is a lot of negativity around among civil servants, cynicism. And I also saw, as I traveled through the country, a lot of good work happening in the country. I thought that we by nature were negative in our disposition. Perhaps because we're fond of masala, we all talk of negative things. We enjoy talking of negative things. We either ignore or don't notice the good work that is happening around us. And I noticed that as Secretary of Education, I traveled to 24 states, going deep into the interior areas, and I discovered wonderful, wonderful work happening. So I thought, wow, how about highlighting this good work? Because that could possibly inspire others to think in terms of doing similar or some sort of a work which is good for the society. And since I had seen so many examples, I thought, let us set up an institution where we can demonstrate to the people at large that a lot of good work can be done because it is being done. So it is no gyan there. It is all through examples of good work that is happening. And not only that, a lot of good work is also being replicated and being scaled. So the Nexus of Good was primarily to demonstrate that if all the rascals and the ruffians of the world could come together and make life difficult for us, why shouldn't good people come together and spread goodness? And this can be done if good people come together. And for that, it is important first to notice good work. Because if we have a disposition towards all things that is negative, we will not even notice good work. So first thing is to notice good work, then understand that good work of what is happening, how it is happening, and then think in terms of appreciating it. Because one thing which we don't do is to appreciate good work. So third step is appreciate good work and then try to replicate and scale good work. In that, I also came to know that a lot of scaling happens through public-private partnership. This is another part which I understood through my career that efficiencies come from the private domain and scale comes from the government domain. Unfortunately, both of us curse each other. Like most in the bureaucracy think all NGOs are all frauds. Most of the private sector people think that everyone in the bureaucracy is corrupt. Both are equally wrong. There are good people in the private domain. There are good people in the public domain. So why can't these two good people come together, understand the good work, and jointly scale good work?
I think it's a
I
very,
saw
very sorry,
innumerous
sorry.
such examples, and that is how we set up this Nexus of Good, starting with a small
I think
yeah.
uh, I'm losing you, sir. I
Sorry,
mean, can you come?
Sanjeev.
Yeah, you were losing you, sir. Can you repeat what you just said? You were mentioning about the best examples. Okay, friends. I mean, we just have to wait for
I'm
2 or 3
audible, sir.
minutes. Well,
Sanjeev.
no, not really, sir. Not really. You're not audible at the moment. Can you come again, sir? Okay, friends. I mean, while he comes online, I mean, there is a section in his book in which he talks about politicians that he could not meet. And that's the story. I mean, he did want to meet President Kalam because he felt that had he met Abdul Kalam, I mean, life would have been very different, because that's one person who continues to inspire so many of us. I mean, everybody. I mean, across age groups, across professions, because Dr. Abdul Kalam, I mean, he's inspired scientists, he's inspired technologists, he's inspired teachers. So, I mean, that's one aspect which Mr. Anil Swarup had to mention, which he wanted to do. I mean, till such time as he comes online, let me also share with you, friends, that I had the pleasure of working with Mr. Anil Swarup when he was the chairman of APIDA. APIDA is the Agricultural and Processed Foods Export Development Agency, and I've had the privilege of working with him both when I was Secretary Horticulture and Food Processing in Uttarakhand, and also in West Bengal. And in fact, one of the encounters that he describes with Mr. Buddhadev Bhattacharya was the time when we were both together in the same hall. We worked together with several of the people that he's mentioned, including Mr. Sharad Pawar and with Mr. N.D. Tiwari. Uh, so I think uh, we would have liked to continue our conversation, but perhaps the Sri Lankan sun is quite bright, and the connectivity is perhaps not giving us as much support as we would have liked to do it. So I'll try for another 2 or 3 minutes before we decide to close it. As it is, we were planning to have a 40-minute conversation today. There's a question for me. That question is: would I like to do a book on my encounters with politicians that I served with? Uh, yes and no. Because unlike Mr. Anil Swarup, who took very copious notes on each day of his service career, I've not been that regular. So I've been off and on about it. But certainly, I must say that, encounters, and I've had the privilege of meeting, like Mr. Anil Swarup or any other IAS officer, we've had the opportunity of meeting a very diverse set of leaders from across the political spectrum. Having been born on the West Bengal cadre, I knew a lot of people from the CPM. I mean, in fact, both Jyoti Basu and Buddhadev Bhattacharya have been in chief minister that I had to interact with. But more than that, I also got to deal with the GNLF agitation and had to work with Subhash Keeshing and Mr. Pradhan, Mr. C.K. Pradhan. Now, this was a very interesting relationship because for about 2 years, we were really battling each other. I mean, we were battling on behalf of the state government. We were literally having encounters with GNLF. And then after the settlement, we started working together for development. I think the moment I use the word development, Mr. Anil Swarup is back. Welcome back, sir. I mean, we had a little signal issues. Now, you were at that point of time talking about, I mean, I think I've lost the chain of thought, but meanwhile, I was trying to respond to them and tell them about the politicians that I have interacted with. And I was telling them that, all of us get to interact with politicians across the political spectrum. So I think both of us have worked with the BJP, with the Congress, with regional parties, with all kinds of parties. There's a question for both of us, which says that there are a lot of books written by retired bureaucrats. And why do you think that is the case? So maybe I'll ask Anil to respond to that question.
First of all, while in service, because of the code of conduct, you can't write things that you would write post-retirement. So that, of course, is the reason why you don't write. But I can assure you that I wrote everything on the files, which probably would never get disclosed. You express your opinion on the files, but not to the public, because that's how bureaucracy has to function. You can't go to town with your difference of opinion with the public, and then you can't work that way. And it's rightly so. You are a part of a disciplined existence. And in that, you have to be careful about what you say while in service. Post-retirement, you can speak out. You should speak out. And if you have a point of view, I had a point of view. I mention it here. That's how it is. I don't know why others write post-retirement. I've yet to come across a civil servant who wrote a book criticizing the government or saying something which is not palatable to the government before retirement. Most of us don't do that even after retirement. How can they do it while in service? So I'm not very sure whether that's the right way of going about it. I did have intentions of writing a book post-retirement, but I never thought that I would end up writing 4 of them.
Yes, so I think it's time that you could probably devote 1 minute to each of your books, so that the listeners can know more about, all the books, ethical dilemmas, not just a civil servant, no more a civil servant. So a little bit, a few lines about each of the books that you've written so far.
Okay, so the first one, while in service, I had a desire to write a book. Since I used to read a lot, I thought I must have a book in my name. So I started writing it while I was in service. Of course, it was published post-retirement. It took me almost 8 years to write that book. That basically, the book was to demonstrate that a civil servant need not necessarily be just a civil servant in the traditional sense of understanding. You can go be much beyond civil servants. The second book, Ethical Dilemmas, came as a consequence of my visits to the academy. And since you've been there, director, you would know it. When the officer joins the service, there's a lot of enthusiasm that I used to see. A lot of enthusiasm. They want to do this, that, and everything. But as they go up the ladder, gradually they become cynical and they start blaming the circumstances for the inability to do things. And I want to demonstrate that every civil servant, irrespective of seniority, could still do things. A lot dependent on him. Yes, the journey is very difficult. I use this couplet in the beginning. मुख्तसर सी जिंदगी के अजब से अफसाने हैं, यहाँ तीर भी चलाने हैं, परिंदे भी बचाने हैं. But I say at the end of the book, it all depends on the civil servant. And I've seen so many of them performing so very well, still excited about doing things in life, doing things in the service. And that's why I conclude that book with another couplet where I say, खुदी को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से कुछ पूछे बता तेरी रजा क्या है. Meaning thereby it depends so much on that particular civil servant, he can still do that job. The third book was written, No More a Civil Servant, was about my post-retirement life. This book was written, so to say, when I was not, I was down with a particular ailment and I couldn't move around. So I didn't have much to do. So I used to pick up my laptop and pen down these lines. Ultimately, it came as a book. The fourth one, the last one about encounters politicians, basically to dispel a lot of misunderstanding about politicians that we have, especially amongst the civil servants, because we tend to blame the politicians for every wrong that is going on. To my mind, that's incorrect. So many good politicians, so many politicians who are bad also have some goodness in them. and there is a way that you can handle those politicians. That's how these books emerge.
In fact, you see, I want to share with everyone, you see that all the entries that he has made are those that he had recorded on that particular date. So I think it's very important that all of us record our impressions, our first impressions of we meet. I mean, I'm talking civil servants, and even those who are not civil servants. We must record that because it's very interesting to see what he wrote about Ganizal Singh, what he wrote about so many other people on the day that he met them, because that is very important. Because with the passage of time, as I was just saying, our memory tends to get clouded, and a lot of things then start happening. We have just about 3-4 more minutes. There's a question here to you, sir. Is there any sequel in the pipeline? Is there planning to
Sorry, come
write?
again.
Is there a sequel in the pipeline? Are you writing? You've written encounters with politicians.
I'm right
Encounters
now
with
relaxing as I'm. There's no sequel as far as politicians are concerned. I've already said what I could say, and there's not much more to be said about politicians. But certainly, if time permits me, if I'm alive for another few years, then I would certainly like to write about corruption in governance. That's an
no,
area which has engaged my
no,
attention.
that is there, and I think you should also write about civil servants who inspired you and civil servants who let you down, because as has been pointed out time and again, in our ecosystem it is not just what the political boss says. And you mentioned about chief ministers, you mentioned about chief secretaries and DGPs. I think all of us also realize that sometimes much more than the politician, it is the senior colleagues who tend to who tend to buckle, and who do not behave in the most ethical manner that is expected of them. Before we close, your interactions with Prime Minister Modi, because I think everybody, I mean, you've had many encounters with the Prime Minister, let's say many engagements with the Prime Minister, because you can't have an encounter with the Prime Minister. So let's hear about your engagements with the Prime Minister, and that will be the last 3 or 4 minutes of our conversation.
My first engagement with the Prime Minister was as Secretary Cole, where I had a different opinion with him. And this was my first engagement with him, but I told him about my point of view, and I was very surprised. He totally agreed with me, a view that was totally at variance with what he had in mind. And in fact, what he told the coal minister helped me a lot subsequently, because the coal minister then thought that I don't know correctly or wrongly, that I was close to the Prime Minister, because Prime Minister agreed with my point of view, which was at variance with him. It made my life very easy in court. My last engagement was even more interesting. Then I was Education Secretary, and I was invited by the PMO to brief the Prime Minister on health insurance, something which I had done almost a decade before that. I went there, and here again, I had a different opinion with the Prime Minister. Prime Minister was averse to having insurance companies in the insurance model. And when the health secretary made that presentation, he appeared a bit annoyed, because he felt that insurance companies were all looting around and they were not doing any good work. I had the same view, in the sense that I thought that the insurance company had a very important role to play in health insurance. So I spoke for about 15 minutes, and contrary to the general impression, he heard me out totally without even interrupting me once. And at the end of it, he said, Anilji, you are right. And that day, Ayushman Bharat was born. Of course, it was christened later on. So my interaction with Mr. Modi were very interesting ones. On a few occasions, I did disagree with him. Not many dared to do that. And almost every occasion, he agreed with me. So it was I found him an extremely decisive person, a very patient listener. Uh, of course, a few things did surprise me, that he was extremely fond of technology. In fact, he was very appreciative of what I was doing in the coal ministry and education ministry. But what surprised me was that the same technology was not being used in the PMO. And I've written about it in the book as well.
So I think the point which Mr. Swarup is making, not just today, but throughout his career, is that a civil servant must speak out his or her own mind. And I think we'll close this session by remembering Sardar Patel. I mean, I call him the Bhisham Pitama of the Indian civil service, because he was the one who ensured that civil service retains and maintains its character, its integrity, and gets its due through Article 311 of the Constitution. So, while thanking Mr. Anil Swarup, I think both of us would like to echo the sentiments of Sardar Patel, which are very clearly etched in the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. You shall not have a united India unless you have a civil service which has the freedom, the competence to speak out its own mind. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Mr. Swarup, for joining us from Colombo. And we hope that you will continue to engage with us. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjeev. God bless you.
Thank you.